Is the Sphinx actually much older than generally assumed? And wasn't it the ancient Egyptians who created the stone hybrid creature? Although the venerable statue is one of the most famous stone witnesses to history, it is still overshadowed by gigantic question marks. Question marks that have the potential to overturn everything we think we know about the past. Incredible but true, some researchers are convinced that the Sphinx guards the gateway to a hidden world that leads us straight to a forbidden historical truth. However, many a Sphinx riddle presents itself in a much more fundamental way. Because did you know that the experts actually have no idea what purpose the imposing structure served? What's more, we also don't know when exactly the lion with the human head was created and which ruler commissioned its construction. In this regard, most researchers point to the pharaoh Khafre, also known as Chafre or Chafre, who was in power from around 2520 to 2494 BC. Other historians, however, consider it more likely that the hybrid creature was created at the behest of King Cheops, and therefore around 100 years earlier from the hot desert soil. And still others, well, somewhat more alternative track seekers, are convinced that the Sphinx has in fact adorned the Giza Plateau for over 10,000 years. But more on that in a moment. Why was the Sphinx built in the first place? When it comes to the question of the statue's function, the idea of a colossal guardian protecting the other magnificent buildings of Giza has prevailed. Despite this widespread idea, however, the official specialist text on the Sphinx emphasizes that its original purpose remains unknown to this day. In addition to the guardian theory, it is also conceivable that the building belonged to the sun cult and represents the deity Harmarchus, although some experts also recognize it as a representation of the pharaoh Khafre. The Anubis Sphinx. It should be clear to all of us that the Sphinx no longer shines in its original splendor. And by that, we don't just mean the lost nose. No, some skeptical researchers such as Robert Temple take the question of the Sphinx's former appearance even further. In certain circles, there is the theory that the hybrid creature once represented Anubis, the ancient Egyptian god of funeral rites and mummification. This would at least be suggested by the inconsistent proportions between the skull and body of the statue, which could plausibly be explained by an originally much larger jackal head. According to Temple's explanations, the Anubis Sphinx was located in a moat filled with water, which is referred to as Jackal Lake in the ancient pyramid texts. However, as the original skull was later damaged, the Egyptians quickly decided to put a human head on the predator's body. Where does the tunnel at the back of the Sphinx lead to? As we can only look at the Sphinx's head, just like our fellow human beings, it is perhaps worth taking a closer look at the back of the statue. Spurred on by the reports of a local worker, Egyptologists Mark Lenner and Zahi Hawass removed a stone to the left of the Sphinx's tail in the 1970s, and then actually saw a small entrance. Officially, however, further investigations did not reveal any breathtaking sensational finds. The ominous cavity contained nothing but barren stone. On the other hand, there are a few clips that have been circulating the web for some time and show us another passageway, which is blocked by boards. However, it is not completely uncertain where this access leads to, because as mentioned, it does not officially exist. The historical truth is said to slumber beneath the paws of the Sphinx. This also applies to the legendary Hall of Records, which conservative Egyptologists categorically place in the realm of myths and legends. The alternative camp, however, believes that the hybrid being is enthroned above a secret tunnel that leads straight to the truth about the civilization heyday of ancient Egypt. In detail, it is said to be an ancient library that houses an incredible treasure trove of knowledge. A treasure trove of knowledge that was not accumulated by the inhabitants of the Pharaonic Empire, however, but by a lost predecessor culture. These discoveries were completely forgotten. But assuming that this fantastic story really is true in the end, shouldn't there be some evidence to support its accuracy? Well, this is where some exciting discoveries come into play, but hardly anyone talks about them nowadays. When Emile Barrès cleared the Sphinx of modern sand between 1925 and 1936, he discovered that the structure had two entrances. However, the shafts apparently led nowhere and ended up in underground dead ends. The same was true of the third shaft, which Maurice discovered on the body of the statue. In the late 1970s, a team from SRI International then set about the task of investigating the exciting rumors about secret chambers and hidden tunnels using somewhat more modern means. However, although the American researchers penetrated up to 7 meters into the rock, the hoped-for direct hit failed to materialize. And yet, the seismic measurements indicated in the same breath that there are indeed unknown cavities slumbering deep beneath the Sphinx. Investigations unwanted. Officially, however, scientists suspect that the anomalies underground are purely natural in origin. But wouldn't it still be worth getting to the bottom of the matter once and for all? Well, theoretically, yes. But in practice, this is simply not possible. And for one very simple reason: the Egyptian Antiquities Authority has banned all further investigations. According to them, this step was taken to protect the ancient building from damage, but the skeptical opposing side believes that it is more likely that those responsible do not want the true secret of the Sphinx to be revealed. The question of the true age. We have already mentioned that the dating of the Sphinx is not entirely uncontroversial, even among official experts. But while the discussions here only revolve around a few decades, Robert M. Schock is convinced that the hybrid creature has been enthroned on the Giza Plateau for over 10,000 years. Having traveled to Egypt in 1989 to put the controversial thesis of author James Anthony West to the test, it took the Boston University professor less than 2 minutes to realize that there was something wrong with the official historiography. According to this, both the core body of the Sphinx and the walls of the enclosure are adorned with telltale traces of water erosion that simply do not correspond to the last 5,000 years of the climate history of the Eastern Sahara. In fact, we are dealing here with the unmistakable signatures of heavy rainfall, which is said to have eaten into the rock around the year 9700 BC. Anyone who puts 1 and 1 together and remembers the roots of ancient Egypt only go back to 3000 BC will inevitably be confronted with a groundbreaking truth. The Pharaonic Empire's inhabitants could not have built the Sphinx at all. But then, who were the real builders? Well, this is a question that Graham Hancock has also looked into. However, the answer is obvious to the British writer and alternative historian. There was once a forgotten advanced civilization that was almost completely wiped out by a global flood and served as a teacher for the peoples that followed. And indeed, the Sphinx would lead us straight back to that mythical time of the beginning. In this regard, however, Hancock refers not only to the aforementioned water erosions, but also to the fact that the alignment of the Giza buildings only coincides with the position of the Orion stars if we turn the wheel of time back to the year 10,500 BC. But before we get it wrong, Hancock believes that the other structures on the Giza Plateau were very much created by the Egyptians, but they were built much later and meticulously aligned with that of the venerable Sphinx. The Talking Sphinx. Well, maybe one day the statue will decide to spill its secrets itself, because according to an old legend, it has already done so once. According to this, Thutmose IV once had a supernatural experience. Even before the future pharaoh ascended the throne, he lay down to sleep under the head of the Sphinx, which was buried up to its neck in the sand at the time. And while the future ruler slumbered peacefully, the unbelievable happened. The Sphinx began to speak and promised to make Thutmose pharaoh if he uncovered the statue. No sooner said than done. The sleep-drunk man immediately set to work and completely freed the magnificent structure from the hot desert sand. And the Sphinx also kept its promise. Thutmose became king of Egypt around the year 1397 BC. Why are there no inscriptions? But how is it even possible that the wildest speculations about the true origins of the Sphinx are still circulating today? From the ancient Egyptians to the aforementioned predecessor culture to aliens, many different groups are suspected of having created the imposing statue. Despite the obvious importance the Sphinx must have held for its builders, there are no inscriptions anywhere, either inside or outside the structure, that explain who was responsible for its construction. The conviction of mainstream historians that the hybrid creature was born at the behest of Pharaoh Khafre is essentially based on a stone tablet located between the Sphinx's paws and called the Dream Still. However, the opposing side replies that this interpretation is merely a poorly substantiated attempt to remain within the boundaries of generally accepted historiography. Is there a second Sphinx? Although the Great Sphinx of Giza is by no means the only stone hybrid of its kind, one thing is undisputed. In terms of its splendor and its size, it is unique. Or is it? Well, authors Jerry Cannon and Malcolm Hutton believe it is more likely that there is a second, no less impressive Sphinx slumbering beneath the sands of the Giza Plateau. After all, we should not forget that Sphinxes were almost always depicted in pairs in ancient Egyptian art. The ominous twin statue is said to lie opposite the first Sphinx and symbolize the transformation of the sun into the moon. The hole in the Sphinx's head. During investigations of the Sphinx, geologist Robert Schoch discovered with his ground-penetrating radar that there is a recessed area in the head of the Sphinx. Aerial photographs confirm this view, as the images show a kind of hole on the head of the Sphinx. The French Egyptologist Émile Barrès and his research team measured the hole in 1925 and filled it with cement. They found it. The picture shows a worker standing in the hole. There was an iron trapdoor at the bottom of the hole. The researchers suspect that the hole was originally used to attach a headdress to the Sphinx head. It was later deepened in search of secret chambers. The secret chamber. Researchers from the team of Egyptologist Dr. Manu Seyfrides estimate the size of this secret chamber to be around 100 square meters. They discovered the chamber with the help of seismic tomography technology. The archaeologists suspect that the chamber was built to store treasures or ancient libraries. They found not just one chamber, but several rooms. One of these rooms is located directly under the statue and probably contains a treasure. However, Seyfrides also suspects that the chamber has since been flooded by water and its contents plundered by treasure hunters. The myth that there is an ancient library in a chamber beneath the Sphinx has been around for a very long time. The American astrologer Edgar Cayce was the first to make this assumption. However, he never found any proof. The former Egyptian Minister of State for Antiquities, Dr. Zahi Hawass, however, denied the existence of such chambers under the Sphinx, but confirmed the existence of two tunnels. However, old pictures of the Sphinx are striking. They show a wooden walkway running in front of the Sphinx. Neatly shaped limestone blocks run from there to the paws or between the paws. One could assume that they were placed to cover one or more secret chambers. Mysterious hole. Another mysterious hole is located at the bottom of the rear foot of the 4,500-year-old structure. It is not normally visible. It is located near the tail of the Sphinx and, according to British archaeologist and historian Dr. Bettany Hughes, it is a kind of hidden entrance. She believes it is connected to a large secret chamber inside the statue. Hidden chambers containing hidden secrets and possibly valuable treasures. In her estimation, the tunnel could be linked to the ancient Egyptian king Khufu, who was buried in a pyramid near the Sphinx. However, the researchers also say that they do not yet know where the tunnel leads. Dr. Hughes is very certain that there is a smaller chamber directly beneath the paws, but the archaeologists do not know what it houses. However, the researchers hope that these secret tunnels lead to other tunnels and chambers that contain undiscovered treasures. 3 secret tunnels. Archaeologists believe that there are a total of 3 secret tunnels beneath the Sphinx. The first tunnel was found in 1937 by a French engineer at the back of the Sphinx when he was examining the structure for treasures. There is a second tunnel on the north side of the statue, but it has been flooded. Presumably, treasures and monuments were hidden here in times long past. The third tunnel was discovered by an Italian adventurer at the beginning of the 19th century. It was located behind the Dream Portrait, a stele between the 2 front paws of the Sphinx. Minister of State Dr. Hawass had excavations carried out under the main body of the Sphinx. Access tunnels to several large caves were found directly beneath the Sphinx. These caves appear to be of natural origin. But archaeologists believe that there are even greater secrets. They assume that the Sphinx even sits above a complete network of chambers and tunnels. The Chamber of the Sphinx. During the restoration of Emperor Nero's huge palace in Rome, archaeologists discovered a secret subterranean vaulted chamber. It is decorated with panthers, centaurs, and a sphinx, and lay in the dark for 2,000 years. The chamber is one of the ruins of the so-called Golden House, Domus Aurea. This is the name given to the huge palace that Nero had built and which fell victim to the Great Fire of Rome in 64 AD. The chamber was only found by chance when archaeologists were erecting scaffolding for work on the adjoining room. In addition to the figures, a rich wall decoration of flowers, birds, and aquatic creatures was also discovered in this vault. To this day, most of the chamber has still not been uncovered and is covered with earth. It will probably never be fully discovered, as experts fear that further excavations would considerably destroy the stability of the chamber. Secret Chamber in the Pyramid of Giza. The world-famous Pyramid of Giza in Egypt is also full of myths and secrets. To this day, archaeologists and scientists still don't know much about the pyramid. Some parts have been discovered, but much is still hidden. However, they have found a 30-meter deep cavity above the so-called Grand Gallery. This gallery is a part of a pyramid that leads to the so-called King's Chamber. So far, the researchers do not know much about this chamber. They have not yet been able to find out for what purpose it was built or what function it fulfilled. It could well be that the chamber had no function at all, but is simply a gap in the pyramid's architecture. This would not be unusual, as such gaps are not uncommon. Another possibility is that it was simply an empty space that the workers used to build rooms underneath. For example, the famous Grand Gallery could only be built with such a cavity. Architecturally, these cavities or gaps were absolutely necessary. On the other hand, this could actually be a large chamber, or it could be another large gallery. Hidden Underworld. The Pyramid of Giza holds many more secrets than the recently discovered secret chamber. In fact, researchers have discovered a huge network of underground chambers and tunnels beneath the pyramid. These tunnels and chambers were hidden for thousands of years, and even today they are only accessible to a few people. However, as they are discovered and explored, they raise more and more questions. Incidentally, the same applies to all the pyramids on our planet. We only know a fraction of how they were built, why they were built, and what secrets they hold. Tutankhamun's Burial Chamber. In 1922, the tomb of the famous Egyptian pharaoh Tutankhamun was discovered by researchers in the so-called Valley of the Kings. He had died at the age of just 19, and when researchers found his tomb, unlike many other pharaoh tombs, it had not been looted. It contained over 5,000 intact objects, most of which were made of gold. Since then, many myths have grown up around this tomb. Radar analysis have fueled archaeologists' hopes that there could be another previously secret chamber behind the walls of the tomb. There are even speculations that it could be the burial chamber of the legendary Egyptian queen Nefertiti. She was the wife of Tutankhamun's father, Pharaoh Akhenaten. Her mortal remains were never found. Researchers theorize that it could be possible that there was no suitable burial place for Tutankhamun because he died very suddenly. They therefore believe that the priests of the time had Nefertiti's tomb reopened and divided, and Tutankhamun found his final resting place there. In any case, the archaeologists are pretty sure that there must be another chamber behind the north wall of Tutankhamun's tomb. Investigations using high-performance radar and infrared thermal cameras have shown that there must be something else behind the wall of hard rock that is clearly distinguishable from the hard rock. The most likely scenario is an empty room that could be an extension of Tutankhamun's tomb. The discovery of the Sphinx of Giza. The Sphinx, located today on a plateau between the Egyptian capital Cairo and the desert, was covered by sand for centuries, as it is much lower than the famous pyramids. Periodically, the head of the monument peeked out of the desert sand. In ancient times, a Roman emperor is said to have already ensured that the impressive monument was uncovered. Then, the desert swallowed the structure again until the Sphinx was uncovered once more in the 19th century. At that time, researchers are said to have already been in rooms under the Sphinx, and there are also reports about what they found there. Among other things, there is said to have been a rope with a skull in one room. Both artifacts are said to have been arranged in a way that archaeologists assumed that they represented some kind of warning or symbolic language. In addition, the men were said to have suddenly found themselves standing in front of a passageway that had some sort of light barrier. Both were unable to step behind this portal for mysterious reasons. Later, reports like these were dismissed as fabrications and pomposity. But far more serious researchers have visited and also described the passages and catacombs under the great monuments of Egypt. Among them were not only archaeologists of modern times, but also an eyewitness from ancient times. Egypt's underground tunnels. A serious researcher who left very detailed and credible reports about 100 years ago was Hamilton M. Wright. Working for decades in the Valley of the Kings and on the Giza Plateau, Wright and his men are said to have discovered in 1935 an ancient subway tunnel system so vast that it can be compared to today's subway shafts and tunnels. According to Wright's estimates, these tunnels were around 4,000 to 5,000 years old, possibly older. The main tunnel, according to the reports, runs under the causeway between the Second Pyramid and the Sphinx. Excavations revealed shafts that reach up to 50 meters deep in the earth. The men claim to have discovered spacious chambers, side niches, and artifacts. The reports appeared in U.S. mainstream news and academic journals at the time. Shortly thereafter, the Egyptian government banned all reports that referred to underground tunnels. Since the Egyptian Antiquities Authority's gag order, research findings may be published only in consultation with the government. Every archaeologist is practically subject to censorship by the State Administration of Antiquities. But if we dig a little in the annals of time, we find quite different accounts of Egypt's mysterious underworld. Herodotus, a Greek historian from the 5th century BC, was a great fan of Egyptian culture and architecture. From him come the oldest sketches and reports about these buildings. Herodotus is said to have visited the interior of the pyramids, the Sphinx, and extensive underground labyrinths around 450 BC. For example, he also reports a room under a pyramid that contained carved animal figures. Since the Egyptians knew a rich underworld with many deities, it is almost obvious that this people knew underground places of worship. The underground gods Osiris and Anubis were also sometimes depicted in animal form, which explains the carved animal figures in Herodotus' account. According to the reports, there were also tunnels under the pyramids of Memphis. Possibly these were even connected with the Giza Plateau. 800 years after Herodotus, a Syrian philosopher, Amalekis, came to Egypt. He too wrote about an underground tunnel system that was accessible through the corpus of the Sphinx. On old photographs of the Sphinx, the accesses on the back, on the head, and on the side can even be seen. There are even modern photographs that show these accesses. Today, these are closed, and this is due to a man who plays an extremely dubious role in the history of Egyptology. But more about that in a moment. We'll first take a look at what the world's most famous clairvoyant said about the Sphinx. The Hall of Records. According to a legend, under the left paw of the lion-like Sphinx, there is a room where all the knowledge of mankind is stored. There, people are supposed to find not only the missing information about their true origins, but also information about the lost continent of Atlantis and human civilizations that lived on Earth 10,000 years ago and even earlier. These theories got a new wind through a medium that became popular worldwide in the 1920s. The US-American Edgar Cayce was considered an exceptional medium and made more than 100 predictions about the future in a trance. Cayce was not right with everything, but the clairvoyant still achieved a hit rate that is unparalleled to this day. A sleeping prophet, Cayce foresaw the stock market crash of 1929 and ensuing Great Depression, saw the rise and fall of the Nazis, the assassination of Kennedy, the invention of the computer, human travel to the moon, and the discovery of the Hall of Records in Egypt. Cayce said the room would be found in the 1990s and provide information about human history as well as Atlantis. Cayce also said that the Sphinx was by no means only 4,500 years old, but far older. It was not built by the Egyptian kings. Those responsible, he said, were a much older, advanced civilization associated with the Atlanteans. Now we have 2023, and officially the room was not found so far. So was Cayce mistaken, or were we just not looking closely? The secrets of the Sphinx revealed? In the 1980s and 1990s, international archaeologists conducted intensive research of the Sphinx. It was already obvious that this monument was built in a completely different way than the pyramids. The Sphinx was mostly hewn out of the sandstone in one piece. There were also indications that the building was restored in the era of Pharaoh Cheops. Until today, it is speculated that Cheops was not responsible for the construction of the pyramid named after him. The great Egyptian king probably only had the buildings restored and possibly used them for state purposes. For both monuments, there is credible evidence that they date much further back in time. Rock samples for dating are now strictly forbidden by Egyptian authorities, although there have been multiple indications that mistakes were made in the initial dating. It is possible that the samples were taken from sites that were worked on in later eras. You can compare it to someone taking a sample from the exterior of a house newly plastered in the 1950s and then concluding that the year of construction was the same as the sample. Yet the core of the house could easily be 100 years or more older. The U.S. geologist Robert Shaw conducted a series of seismic studies in the vicinity of the Sphinx in the 1990s. The results of these studies were so overwhelming that NBC presented them as part of a one-hour documentary called The Mystery of the Sphinx. Among other things, Shaw had geologically examined the erosion patterns on the foundation of the Sphinx and come to the conclusion that the traces of weathering could not possibly have been caused by wind and sand. Rather, these erosion patterns came from water, and clearly from water that flowed from above the monument down into the ground. Now, the area around the Sphinx has been a desert for 5,000 years. Consequently, the Sphinx must actually be much older. Extensive rainfall occurred in the area 10,000 or even 50,000 years ago. Critics of Shaw's theory thought that the erosion traces could have been caused by flooding of the Nile, but the tracks were examined by experts several times, and all of them independently came to the conclusion that the water must have come from above. Consequently, it could only be rain. Shaw had shown photos of the erosions to leading geologists around the world and cut away the top and bottom of the photos so that the geologists could judge without bias. Shaw also found an interesting mineralogical change in the left area of the Sphinx paw that suggested a rock slab, later workings, or even a building hidden beneath the ground. But before Shaw could continue working, a man who plays an extremely dubious role in Egyptian archaeology intervened. The machinations of Zahi Hawass. Zahi Hawass is an Egyptologist and was a close advisor to Egypt's Department of Antiquities for several decades, or even headed that department. Hawass's influence drove many researchers out of the country who pursued theses that either Hawass's influence drove many researchers out of the country who pursued theses that either Hawass himself or the government did not like. Hawass also repeatedly attracted media attention for his hatred of foreign Egyptologists, incompetence, and scandals. Shaw's discoveries Hawass called hallucinations of an American. Shortly after Hawass ensured that Shaw and his colleague John Anthony West were no longer allowed to continue research on the Sphinx despite a budget of the millions, Hawass put himself in the spotlight. Hawass led journalists to the Sphinx, climbed into the entrance to the underground shafts with media attention, and opened a hatch that led down to the underworld. After these appearances, the course of the Egyptians changed abruptly. All access points to the Sphinx were closed, and since then, Hawass and the authorities have denied that there were ever any access points to the interior of the Sphinx. Insiders claim that official modern Egyptology has long been nothing more than a farce. Important results are suppressed, facts are denied, and only those scientists who play the game are even allowed to research the pyramids or the Sphinx. The U.S. medium, Edgar Cayce, could have been right in a certain way, and Shaw discovered the reason the Hall of Records as well, as revealed that the Sphinx cannot only be 4,500 years old. Many an ancient structure stands in the proverbial shadow of its more famous counterparts. Or have you heard of the Tomb of Osiris? This mysterious underground complex is just as much a part of the Giza Plateau as the Great Pyramid of Cheops and the Sphinx, and yet it is far less in the spotlight than the colossal structures above ground. And that, although the existence of this mysterious complex was actually handed down thousands of years ago, unfortunately researchers sometimes tend to dismiss the reports of our ancestors as unfounded fantasies. This was also the case for Herodotus, who traveled around the land of the pharaohs around 450 BC and immortalized his experiences for posterity in his second book of histories. In this work, the Greek historian also reported on a mystical tomb under the rocky hill on which the Great Pyramids are enthroned. And in this tomb, Herodotus wrote, "An artificial lake surrounds an island where Pharaoh Cheops was buried." And although the ancient records were available to us in the centuries that followed, they ultimately had a small but crucial flaw. No one believed that the site described by Herodotus really existed. In fact, it took over 2,000 years before the historian's account was finally brought back to reality. In 1933, the Egyptologist Selim Hassan managed to track down the hidden site, and thus reminded the world once again that we should not always immediately relegate the reports of the past to the realm of myths and legends. Regarding his sensational discovery, Hassan assumed that the tomb complex dates back to the 26th dynasty, and thus to the period around 500 BC. However, other researchers have their doubts about this dating, and consider it more likely that the site is in fact significantly older. In the mysterious interior of the Osiris tomb, it is indisputable that the rediscovery of the hidden tomb was an archaeological sensation either way, but it is also undisputed that the site is equally confusing and enigmatic, and continues to fuel the wildest theories to this day. If you will, the complex resembles a winding labyrinth of tunnels and chambers, and even the descent through the shaft into the rocky underground is a dizzying adventure. And while there are only a few photos and film recordings of this testimony carved into the stone, the Egyptologist Zahi Hawass devoted himself to the task of uncovering the long-forgotten secrets of the Osiris tomb from 2008 onwards. Basically, the complex consists of 3 different levels, one of which goes deeper than the other. And while the chamber of the first level measures about 4 by 10 meters, it is, mysteriously, completely empty. You won't find any mystical funerary texts, precious grave goods, or even a sarcophagus here. But luckily, the chamber of the second level is a bit better equipped. However, to reach it, you have to descend one of 2 iron ladders that have seen better days. Once you arrive at the bottom, 18 meters below the surface, you will finally see a 5 by 8 meter large cavity divided into 8 niches. The postures and bones found and analyzed here led experts to believe that the tomb was built in the late period of ancient Egypt. The mortal remains that rest in the massive granite sarcophagus in niche number 2 also belong to said bones. But what lies behind this coffin is possibly even more significant. In detail, the object blocks a narrow passage measuring approximately 80 by 100 centimeters, which leads to the east, and thus exactly in the direction of the Valley Temple and the Sphinx. In the same breath, it appears that the coffin was pushed into the passage with such force that it broke. Many a skeptical mind suspects that this was not an accident, but rather the deliberate creation of a barrier. Combined with the fact that only authorized persons are allowed to enter the site anyway, the alternative camp wonders why this passage, of all places, was blocked. Or to put it another way, what is slumbering in the Osiris tomb that the rest of the world is not allowed to see, let alone explore? But let's continue reading. The second and last granite sarcophagus of the second level is located in niche number 7, and it is empty. And just like the level above, this one also appears strangely bare and unadorned. In fact, it is precisely this simplicity that raises the first doubts about the date of origin around the year 500 BC. During this period, the Egyptians usually decorated their tombs with cartouches, colorful reliefs, and countless inscriptions. But there is none of this in the Osiris tomb. The bare ceilings, walls, floor, and sarcophagi are more reminiscent of the buildings of much older dynasties, such as the pyramids of Giza, the Serapeium of Saqqara, and the Osirion in Abydos. With the knowledge that ancient Egyptian burial sites were often used multiple times, it seems possible that the analyzed ceramic and bone remains also come from much younger burials, and that the age determination is consequently not correct. But be this as it may, there is one point we have not yet addressed in detail. Why is the site called the Osiris tomb at all? Well, to understand this, we have to delve even deeper underground and take a look at what is probably the most enigmatic of all levels: the tomb of the god. Not even the god of the dead is immune to death. Although Osiris is considered the ruler of the afterlife in Egyptian mythology, he is said to have been murdered by his own brother, Seth. But that's not all. In his boundless rage, Seth then also dismembered the body of Osiris and scattered it throughout the land. Fortunately for us, Osiris had a sister-in-law, Isis, who gathered up the remains of her husband and, with the help of the god Anubis, brought him back to life. So far, so mythological. But in fact, the belief in the god of the dead was so deeply rooted in the consciousness of the ancient Egyptians that they even built him a separate burial place. However, it is said to have not been the real final resting place of a living deity, but a purely symbolic tomb, slumbering in the lowest level of the hidden complex at Giza. Those who descend the 2 by 2 meter shaft in niche number 4 on the second level will not only find themselves 30 meters below ground, but also at the actual heart of the site. And while the upper passages are characterized by barren stone, down here the preferred element is water. A splashing problem that Salim Hassan was also confronted with. He had tried to completely drain the chamber, but after the pumps had been running for no less than 4 years, he had to realize that he would not win the battle against the water. According to Herodotus' reports, it is only logical that this area of the complex is so dripping wet. After all, the old Greek did tell of a burial island in the middle of an artificial lake. Nevertheless, the water in this spacious chamber is likely to be much higher today than in Herodotus' time. And in fact, the experts cannot even say for sure where that water comes from. What is certain, however, is that the traces of the past are still visible down here. The lid of the Osiris tomb still protrudes a little way out of the water. The rest of the coffin and the island mentioned by Herodotus, on the other hand, are completely flooded. The unsolved mysteries of the past. Although the nature of the site matches the ancient records, it does raise a number of questions, some of which are of a very practical nature. How did the Egyptians manage to maneuver the granite sarcophagus, which weighs an estimated 10 to 15 tons, to such a depth? And then there is the fact that the finds recorded here have been dated to an age of 5,000 years, which makes them about twice as old as the artifacts from the second level. And who knows, maybe the rest of the site holds the answers to these and many other unanswered questions, but unfortunately we simply cannot reach them. The eastern wall of the Osiris burial chamber contains another narrow passage that reaches a no less narrow vault after about 20 meters. From here, a shaft measuring just 40 by 40 centimeters leads north towards the Great Pyramid of Giza, and another equally small shaft leads east towards the Sphinx. During his exploration, Zahi Hawass naturally also wanted to know what these passages were for, which is why he unceremoniously sent a young boy in, who promptly got stuck and had to be pulled out by the legs. And even today, we cannot say what these mysterious passageways mean. Some people suspect that they are part of an extensive underground network that is directly connected to the legendary Hall of Records. It is said that this is a mystical storehouse of knowledge, the entrance to which is hidden under the paws of the Sphinx, and which testifies that the Egyptians were significantly influenced by a lost predecessor culture. But there is another way, no less controversial, but different. For many, an alternative spirit does not recognize the Osiris tomb as a symbolic burial place of a god, but as proof that the Egyptians were in possession of futuristic technologies. The crazy theories do not even stop at fully functional dimensional portals, which, however, were hermetically sealed by an ancient technological process. Impressive ruined cities such as the Chichen Itza, Tikal, Kalamakul, and Palenque still bear witness to the overwhelming skills of their creators. And yet experts agree that these stone testimonies to the past represent only the tip of the Mayan iceberg. In fact, a significant part of the Mayan legacy is likely to still be hidden in the impenetrable thicket of the rainforest. But this spectacular find that researchers made in Mexico a few weeks ago gives us an idea of the fabulous windows of opportunity that are yet to be opened in the future. Interestingly, the centuries-old ruins were detected in a LiDAR dataset that had not been collected for archaeological purposes at all. The 120 square kilometer area known as Campeche, Mexico, had actually been mapped to gain new insights into the state of the rainforest. In principle, LiDAR emits pulsed laser lights into the environment. These impulses then bounce off surrounding objects and return to the LiDAR sensor, which in turn measures the time it takes for each impulse to return. The so-called LiDAR point cloud that is created in the process not only allows exact distances to be measured, but also, after several processing steps, a 3D map of the landscape to be created. With the help of this groundbreaking laser scanning technology, it is possible to clear the jungle digitally, and thus catch a glimpse of those silent witnesses to history that have lain hidden for centuries. And of course, Luke Auld Thomas and his team at Tulane University in New Orleans was also aware of the archaeological potential of such LiDAR data, which is why they decided to re-examine the data collected by a Mexican environmental organization for any historical sensations. And with extraordinary success, after the researchers had sent the raw data through a specially developed analyst program, more than 6,500 pre-Columbian relics were revealed, including the ruins of a colossal Mayan city. The fact that these unique relics had not been discovered before is all the more remarkable given that they are located right next to the only highway in the entire area and very close to a modern city. And although the local inhabitants have been farming there for years, no one in government or research knew about them. The second largest Mayan city ever. By now we know that the archaeologists have uncovered nothing less than one of the largest and most densely populated Mayan cities in all of Central America. Named Valerina, the site covers 16.6 square kilometers, and according to expert estimates, it may once have been home to 30,000 to 50,000 people. Furthermore, the detailed analysis revealed that Valerina was divided into two centers, located about 2 kilometers apart. Within these urban cores, numerous monumental buildings are grouped around expansive cobbled squares, with the larger center exhibiting all the characteristics of a typical classic-era Mayan capital. In addition to the squares connected by a wide street, the site also includes impressive temple pyramids, a ball court, and a reservoir formed by a dam. Between the centers, the experts also identified dense development consisting of houses and streets. The archaeological areas in the form of walled field terraces also contributed to the archaeological sensation. The characteristic construction method of Valerina also allowed the researchers to date the site, and everything indicates that the huge site was built before 150 AD. This means that we are in the so-called late preclassic period of the Maya culture, when many such large cities and monumental buildings were built overnight. To date, we only know of one other Maya city that was even more impressive than Valerina, Calamacool, which is located about 100 kilometers away. But that doesn't mean that there might not have been even larger metropolises under the dense canopy of the jungle. But while this amazing discovery once again highlights the huge gaps that still exist in our knowledge of Mayan cities, it also teaches us the fatal error made by researchers in the past. After all, we must not forget that the earlier experts were still firmly convinced that the pre-Columbian cultures of Central America lived only in widely scattered, sparsely populated city-states. The idea that a highly developed civilization could flourish in the harsh tropical world seemed simply absurd, but now the tables have turned. In addition to Valerina, this is also thanks to the discovery of a gigantic Mayan city network in the jungles of Guatemala. A few years ago, and again using LiDAR, archaeologists identified the ruins of over 60,000 houses, palaces, elevated roads, and other structures here, and together the cities are thought to have housed millions of people. In light of this, more and more experts are assuming that such enormous urban settlements were the rule rather than the exception among the Maya, and that in terms of complexity and interconnectedness, they were in no way inferior to the highly developed cultures of ancient Greece or China. The previously established assumption that the tropics are a place where civilizations do not flourish but perish seems hopelessly outdated, and instead, the possibility is now being discussed that complex societies first developed in the tropics and spread out from there. even more massive than the Great Pyramid of Giza, the secrets of El Mirador. Despite all the exceptional archaeological finds, we must not forget that the Maya era is still overshadowed by many huge question marks. This particularly concerns the abrupt demise of the advanced civilization. Around the year 1000 AD, the population density of the Maya began to decline within a relatively short period of time, whereupon the remaining members abandoned their great cities and the infrastructures fell apart. What led to this civilizational collapse, however, is not fully understood. In addition to internal social conflicts and wars, displacement by foreign peoples is also being discussed. Furthermore, studies suggest that climate change with long periods of drought could have led to severe famines. Others show that the Maya overused their agricultural land, ultimately making it infertile. But the Mayan culture's early days are no less mysterious than its end. While some historians assume that it developed from the Olmec culture, which lived on the neighboring Gulf Coast, others consider it more likely that the cultures knew and influenced each other, but developed independently. But the key to the beginning of the Maya may lie dormant in northern Guatemala, more precisely in the sunken city of El Mirador, which many scientists have long referred to as the cradle of Mayan culture. Built more than 2,000 years ago and rediscovered in 1926, the imposing site covers an area of about 15 square kilometers. However, only a fraction of the former structures have been evacuated to this date, and yet this fraction is already quite something. After all, several pyramids have already been uncovered here, the highest of which, called La Danta, measures 70 meters, and in terms of volume, it is even more massive than the world-famous Cheops pyramid in Egypt. But now, LiDAR has shed even more light on the historical darkness of El Mirador and uncovered a total of 417 previously unknown Mayan cities in the region, dating back to around 1000 BC. And just to be clear, this extraordinary discovery shows that the Mayan culture had already achieved unexpected civilizational heights 1,000 years earlier than assumed. In view of this groundbreaking finding, experts are talking about an absolute game-changer that sheds a completely new light on the pre-classical period and opens up an entire chapter of human history that was previously completely unknown. Some scientists now assume that several 100,000 or even 1,000,000 people lived in the metropolitan area at the time. However, the future of El Mirador is uncertain. While researchers naturally hope to further unravel the secrets of the megasite, others are already dreaming of transforming it into a lucrative tourist magnet, similar to Tikal. But so far, even the mere journey there has kept the crowds away. After all, you have to walk 60 kilometers or be flown in by helicopter. So far, so clear. And yet this is precisely where it starts to get tricky, because in fact no one today knows the location of this mausoleum. Ultimately, however, Cleopatra joins a long list of famous names. In fact, not a single tomb of a member of the Ptolemaic dynasty has yet been found. And in places where archaeological experience is, to put it mildly, limited, experts have no choice but to delve into the realm of theories and speculation. Some researchers basically assume that the Queen of the Nile was laid to rest on the former palace grounds of Alexandria. However, if this is really the case, the experts are faced with yet another challenging task. After all, this, like a large part of the city, sank into the sea more than 1,500 years ago. Fortunately, there are daring underwater archaeologists like Frank Goddio, who searched for relics of the lost palace on the seabed in the 1990s and actually found some. While the Frenchman is best known for the spectacular rediscovery of the ancient cities of Herculaneum and Canopus, he had already come across sunken columns, stone blocks, statues, and other artifacts that could be assigned to the former royal quarter of Alexandria a few years earlier. But there was a tiny catch to the archaeological sensation. The mausoleum of Cleopatra was not to be found at the bottom of the ocean. Where Cleopatra's tomb is really hidden. But if it is up to Kathleen Martinez, the lack of a direct hit in the royal quarter of Alexandria was by no means an unfortunate coincidence, but simply the logical consequence. Because the bottom line is that the lawyer and self-made archaeologist from the Dominican Republic is convinced that her colleagues made a huge mistake, and spent decades looking in the completely wrong place. In truth, according to Martinez's approach, Cleopatra's tomb would be in a place that no one would have expected at first, and the body of the last female pharaoh is said to have been brought to the city of Taposiris Magna after her death, or more precisely, to a hidden chamber under a venerable temple complex. The site is located about 50 kilometers from Alexandria, and for Martinez, the traces uncovered so far literally scream that this is where the tomb that researchers have been searching for without success for generations lies dormant. And indeed, we should not forget that this is by no means a new, unconventional theory, but the result of 10 years of meticulous work that Martinez believes will gradually lead to one of the greatest archaeological coups of all time. In the course of this, the team around the expert has already awakened many artifacts and buildings from their historical slumber, which show that the complex of Taposiris Magna really served as a temple in the times of Cleopatra and the Greek pharaohs. But that's not all. Some of the finds, such as ancient coins bearing the image of Cleopatra, even directly link the site to the world-famous queen. Furthermore, an ancient Egyptian necropolis on the site of Taposiris Magna has also been brought back to light, and the elaborate nature of the burials leaves no doubt that the site was reserved for the absolute elite of society. According to Martinez, we should also not ignore the religious zeitgeist of yore. After all, Cleopatra was considered the reincarnation of the goddess Isis at the time. And guess which deity the Temple of Taposiris Magna was dedicated to? The enigmatic end of a queen. To understand why the search for Cleopatra's tomb has become a single archaeological mystery, we should recall the confusion and drama of the ancient situation. Born in Alexandria in 69 BC, Cleopatra ascended to the throne at the age of just 18 following the death of her father, Ptolemy XII. She ruled for 21 years, during which time she was forced to enter into strategic alliances with the enemy in the face of Roman supremacy. As is well known, some of the most famous dynastic marriages of all time were to emerge from these alliances, and after Cleopatra had flirted with Julius Caesar and given birth to his child, she entered into a relationship with his successor, Mark Antony, after Caesar's assassination. The couple had 3 children together, but in 31 BC, Cleopatra's misfortune finally took its course. The Roman naval fleet invaded Egypt under the leadership of Caesar's grandnephew and main heir, Octavian, who later received an honorific name, Augustus. After the Romans had militarily brought the Egyptians to their knees, Mark Antony learned of the alleged death of his lover and committed suicide. Cleopatra, who was still alive in reality, was then taken prisoner by the Romans and probably ended her own life on August 12, 30 BC. However, the details of how she managed this are a historical mystery. There is often talk of a poisonous snake that was smuggled into Cleopatra's chambers in a basket of figs. In retrospect, however, it is more likely that the snake, which was sacred in Egypt, was only added later to attest to the pharaoh's dignified death, and that she ingested the deadly poison in a different way. As mentioned at the beginning, Octavian is said to have granted Cleopatra's last wish and buried her side by side with Mark Antony in her mausoleum. But what if something happened that no Roman knew about? What if Cleopatra had long planned her death and even the way she would be found one day? Well, then we would have arrived at Kathleen Martinez's theory, which states that the priests of Taposiris Magna stole the bodies of Cleopatra and Antony after mummification and buried them in a secret place without the permission of the Romans. And, hand on heart, what place would be better suited for this than one that is invisible to the naked eye? Does this tunnel lead to Cleopatra's tomb? It is no coincidence that the tunnel, which is located some 13 meters below the Temple of Taposiris Magna and is an incredible 1,305 meters long, has been described by experts as a geometric miracle. After all, the construction of this long hidden passage bears a striking resemblance to Eupatolia's tunnel in Greece, which dates from the 6th century BC and is still famous today for its outstanding technical implementation. However, the Greek counterpart did not serve as a passageway to a pompous royal tomb, but as an aqueduct, which transported water from A to B. Whether this tunnel of Taposiris Magna, on the other hand, leads straight to Cleopatra's tomb remains to be seen. And yet, seismic measurements have already revealed an astonishing fact here. In Taposiris Magna, so-called geophones, which detect the smallest vibrations in the Earth's crust and can identify underground activities, should actually reveal a huge empty space below the temple. And for Kathleen Martinez, the time had finally come a few months ago to dive directly into this mysterious underground world, and after the expert had conquered the rickety ladder construct and reached the underground passage, she immediately realized that it must lead to something significant. In fact, we are not dealing with just any old unadorned passageway here, but with a tunnel that had been lavishly plastered and decorated with paintings. It must have taken years to chisel the passage into the rock, but why would the ancient Egyptians have devoted themselves to such an exhausting task? Well, unfortunately, only the future can show that, because after Martinez had felt her way step by step through the narrow, stuffy passageway, she was confronted with an insurmountable mountain of debris after about 30 meters. Fortunately, this literal dead end also held some gaps, and gaps that revealed that the tunnel undoubtedly continued. At the same time, Martinez spoke of an exciting premonition, of an unmistakable feeling that she was on the verge of making one of the greatest archaeological discoveries of all time. So, from that point on, the task was to turn this intuition into certainty, and to begin clearing the barrier of debris and further probing the secrets of the tunnel. And Martinez and her team would certainly have done that if their excavation permit had not expired. In fact, the paperwork involved in further research thwarted the archaeologist's plan, and it was no longer possible for her to clear the mountain of debris and rubble in the remaining time. But the next excavation season is approaching, and Kathleen Martinez promises to continue to do everything she can to finally bring Cleopatra's tomb back to reality. And we would love to bring our videos back to your reality on a regular basis. Feel free to click your thumbs up and subscribe now so you never miss a new post from us again. See you soon!